Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with acclaimed jazz vocalist Kate Baker. She spoke at length about her new 2022 CD, Return to Shore, done with her late husband and celebrated guitarist Vic Juris. The first single, God Only Knows, is coming out on September 23rd, 2022, in connection with Vic's September 26th birthday. This album chronicles a moving love story produced by the great guitarist Dave Stryker. In late December 2019, Vic passed away after a relatively brief but valiant battle with nuero-endocrine cancer. His untimely death at the age of 66 gave way to a crater in the music community. For over 40 years, he was a master of the jazz craft. Kate is a skilled vocalist whose impact on the contemporary music scene is huge, especially as an educator and vocal coach. She opens up about quite a bit. Enjoy this interview.
Well, thanks for taking a minute out today.
Oh, of course. I so look forward to it, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So before we get into this wonderful album with Vic, I want to cover what has been kind of the elephant in the room for the last couple of years, which has been this pandemic, and it really kind of turned a lot of the entertainment arts industry on its ear. And I'm wondering, how did you survive through that period, and how did it change you now that we're coming out of it?
Oh, my God. You know, it was really interesting. It was really a lesson in how do you fall and pick yourself up, because for me, what happened was Vic died, and then the pandemic hit. So it was like, okay, so a lot of the tools that you would use, to help yourself out of, the grief is through people and things like that. Well, I wound up having Christmas here alone with my family on Zoom. I was like, so all those things, it became a real, I had to search within. So I wound up starting to write music. I wound up, just really soul searching in a meditative way, through that. And that's how I kind of handled that. And then when I got out of it, that's actually, the pandemic was still on, and Dave Stryker came over and he said, come on, let me see what else you have, because when we were recording, when we had the funeral, we played I've Grown Accustomed to His Face. And he says, do you have more of that? And he said, yeah. So he came over and we started to work on this project, which was really cathartic, and that's how everything started to happen. And that really healed me, because when I was in the midst of the project, I had a frozen shoulder, like I couldn't move my shoulder and my neck. And then the day we finished, it released. And then I looked up, grief and frozen shoulder, and there it was.
Wow.
Right? So I was like, oh my God. So it was like, so it was really cathartic, and on all sides. And then I would hear about so many people and have so much compassion for people who had lost their family members or whatever. So it was a real time to put your priorities in place of what's important in your life. And so that's what it was for me. Like I want to take the lessons that I learned from that and keep them in my life forever. So, and that, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I remember growing up, I was used to see, the Greatest Generation and all of these stories of people that would go through these enormous struggles and grief and things like that. And I'm thinking, man, I don't want to have anything to do with that. But life is going to give it to you.
It totally is, right?
Yeah, but it's coming out of that, which is something you don't know because you're young and dumb, there's a wisdom, and there's a way that we see the other side and appreciate it when we go through something like that. For something like this pandemic, which we hadn't had anything like that since 1914, and most of us don't have a memory of it, this was a shared boat we were all rowing in, and we all had to figure it out. And then, unfortunately, you lose people, but, there's so many levels of this, of growth, that, there's a silver lining to everything. So I like that word, cathartic. I've heard that a lot with recordings and projects and things that have come out of this, because I think that's it's just a very sound way of looking at things, and it's a good healing process.
It's really funny, because I think that we were forced to be introspective, and for me, I was forced that way when Vic got sick, and then when he passed. So it was like, I'm like, dear Lord, what are you trying to teach me here? And the interesting thing that happened also is at the same time that Vic died, right after that, I had these two big dogs. I don't know if you were ever on social media. Vic would always post about them. Jimi Hendrix and Ella Fitzgerald, two golden doodles. Well, they died also. So when that happened, I said, okay, what am I supposed to learn here? What is the message that, when you're left like that? And it was really interesting. And for me, I also think it was to learn to stand alone, and I learned really about kindness through that whole process.
So let's talk about this album now that it's out.
Okay.
And just how did this project come about? And we kind of talked about it coming to fruition and how it feels, but how did all of this happen to finally get to where it's out now?
Oh God. Okay. It started with Dave Stryker coming over at the house and taking a listen, and we had to dig through files. I'm like, okay, what do I have here? Because originally, Vic and I were planning on doing a duo project. We were originally going to have Tuck and Patty produce us. So right before Vic got sick, in fact, the day that he went in the hospital, we recorded Return to Shore, which is on there, God Only Knows, and also Moonscape. So two originals in that. And when he was recording, I'm like, Vic, are you all right? He's just, I feel a little nauseous. So so we had those tracks. That's when everything started. And so then we had some older tracks, because every now and then we would go into the studio and say, what is this? We would get a really nice response when we would perform live. And so we're like, okay, let's take it in the studio. And that's a little scary because you don't have the audience there. So we went into Paul's studio, Paul Wycliffe, and we recorded. That's where we have I've Grown Accustomed to His Face, The Moon's a Harsh Mistress, Magdalena, and Black Crow. So we had those. So, and Dave's like, these are good, Kate. And then when we were at my house, I had originally recorded a song, Are You Kind? And we also had Blackberry Winter, too. And that song I had written with my friend Sherry Miller. And I wrote it for my father. And now I'm like, oh, my God. And so Vic and I just put it down on guitar in the house. I'm like, oh, my goodness, well, we have this. So some of them I re-sang because I wanted to sing them with a perspective that he's not here anymore. And I guess the whole interesting thing with this, because Vic and I would always argue, I'm like, Vic, before going to see Tuck and Patty, I said, Vic, you know what? We have no theme here. There's no theme. There's nothing connecting all these tunes. Maybe we should pick other songs. And he's like, Kate, what do you mean? And the funny thing was, there was a theme. And then when I looked at it after Vic passed, I realized that the universe was telling us all along, because every single song is about what we went through. It was about losing the person you love, God Only Knows. About like Return to Shore, which is my original, and Returning Home. Moonscape, about looking back on your life and seeing, reflecting back. Even Black Crow for me was really significant because that's the song Joni Mitchell wrote, because Black Crow was how I felt after it all happened. I felt lost, like I was diving down. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do musically? Where's my life now? And now we're in a pandemic. So I think that was really interesting, and it made me really look at the universe in another way, and then I sang Are You Kind? And I re-sung that because I wanted to sing it for my father. And the same as Blackberry Winter, I'll never get over losing you. But I know that life goes on and the memories go dim, so all these songs, so I re-sang that and Both Sides Now because I wanted to sing it to him. And when we were in the studio with Paul and with Dave, I just would close my eyes because a lot of this was rubato. So I would just feel Vic and his spirit, because that was a hard thing to do with the timing, and so I could feel his presence, and that's how we got through those songs. And it was really helpful because Dave was there, and Paul too, with knowing we did one, tops 2 takes, that was it. And he'd be like, that's enough, you did it. I'm like, oh my God. He always went for the feeling, what did it feel like? I really felt this. leave it. It doesn't have to, it's not about being perfect, it's about feeling. And that was a really good lesson for me, you know, because as a singer, well, you know, we're always like, oh, it's got to be perfect. But this, we went for, oh, it's got to be in my heart, and sometimes because it is imperfect, it's perfect. So I started to learn about myself even through this process, you know, of knowing when to work hard and knowing when to trust and knowing when to leave it alone. And I could feel my husband in every take that was on that record.
Since the backbone of this is a love story, talk to me about how you and Vic met and kind of how you got to the point where you knew that this was the one, and just kind of walk me down that path.
Okay. It's interesting. How it started was, I knew from day one with Vic. You know, did you ever look across the room and I just knew. It started, I originally, when I was young, I was in my late teens, I took guitar lessons from him. And we didn't date then. But he would always get a kick out of me, you know, because I was young. You know, my car didn't really work. I had to climb through the window. And and I used to do a solo, and I used to play guitar and sing. And so we would always have these fun lessons. And then I stopped, and I hadn't seen him for years. And at that point, I was then divorced. I went back to school to William Patterson. And all of a sudden, he saw me in the halls. He was like, "Oh my God!" And I knew from that look. And then I had a dream that I was going to marry him. Do you believe it? And
wow.
So, and I just knew, like, you know, we would argue. Like, we had differences of opinions. We were different on so many issues, but there was this thing that was there that was this love, that something that brought us together. So he finally asked me out, and then we started dating, but I wouldn't let him hear me sing. He goes, "I can't believe you're not going to let me hear you." I go, "No, because we're going to have to break up if you don't like it. So let's enjoy this for a little while." And he was like, he goes, "Oh, you are so weird." So, but he, you know, it was funny. So I had my first gig singing jazz at trumpets, and he goes, "You're playing at trumpets?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "But you're playing with all my friends, like and you won't let me come?" I said, "No, you can't." So then I was singing on stage, and all of a sudden, I'll never forget, because it was Waltz for Debbie, and in he walked, and I knew I couldn't jump off the stage. And, you know, and then he had a big smile on his face, and the place was packed. And so he went up to the bar. I think he was so relieved that he bought the whole bar drinks. I think, like, drinks
wow.
on me. So I'm like, you're so relieved I wasn't terrible. But, you know, and then I didn't want to play with him either. I said, no, I have to make my own way. And then I was working a lot at the time, because for me, in order to sing, I had to do it. I had to feel it, do it, understand the history. That's what brings it alive for me, even though I was in school. So I couldn't find a guitar player one night because my guitar player canceled, and he's at my apartment. I must have went through the list of everyone. He said, "Kate, I'm sitting here. You're not going to use me?" I said, "No." And I kept calling. And finally, I go, "All right, there's nobody else." He starts laughing. And then we did the gig, and it was really nice, and we never stopped playing since. And that's how we started.
So how about you? Talk to me a little bit about how your fascination and love of not only singing but jazz came about.
Oh, God. You know, it's funny. That's an interesting story. I remember, you know, when I was younger, I used to play in the guitar mass. I would always sing. I would sing to get out of raking leaves and play the guitar in my room. Or, you know, we would sing on our front lawn where everyone would grab a guitar and come outside and play music. So that was a really nice way of doing that. And I think for me also, it was a social thing, because when maybe I felt a little shy, and I remember some of the neighbors said, "Oh, she sings," and they would come over, and then all of a sudden I was accepted, you know. So music kind of, it was my way of expressing myself when I couldn't do it with words. When I felt too shy to say something, I knew it was my secret place where I could say the truth. And I could be vulnerable, because I didn't really like to be vulnerable on the outside, but I knew it was my secret place to be vulnerable when I'm singing. I could go there. So it was really a release for me, and a way of communicating. So that's why I kept doing it, and then it kept evolving. And then it was interesting. Again, the spirit world introduced me to jazz, because we were with my family at Seaside Heights. I don't know if you've ever been there, but there's a boardwalk there. And so I spun and I won a record, but I won, of course they had jazz on the lower level. So I won on this certain level, and there was a CD of Shirley Horn, and I haven't heard of her because I wasn't listening to jazz at the time. I was young. I said, I want that record. And because we had the same name, my maiden name was Horn. So I bought that record, I came home, I played it, and I never stopped playing it. So she is, to this day, one of my biggest idols. There's nobody that could deliver a story there. And also, I remember seeing her at the Vanguard, and it brought you to tears. It was so moving. And so that's how, then I wanted more. Then I started listening to Billie Holiday, Peggy Lee, all different, artists. And that's how I began singing jazz. And then I went to Liam Patterson also.
So after all of this time, you're obviously in a craft that you've loved. You've dedicated yourself to it. What do you like the best about being a professional singer?
Oh, you know what I like? Well, first of all, I think it's a real, I'm really lucky to be able to express myself for a living, and I like the fact that I'm playing with my colleagues. I love the fact that I love to go to work, and I love to give back. I love to, sing so people feel. And my job is to be authentic and hopefully touch people. So I take that as a huge privilege to be able to do, and hopefully, uplift someone or remind them of something that from their youth, or get to know people. It's really nice. We have this wonderful community. I think of jazz almost like a culture, and I'm so lucky to have that culture in my life, because we have a real community of family with people that aren't necessarily blood family, but they're our family. And we have an understanding without words. When you understand this music, it makes you think outside the box, and it makes you have a better understanding of people. So that's what I love about it.
So, everyone out there that knows Vic and his music or has been touched by him has the perception of who he is. But as a spouse, you have a special insight. How would you like the world to remember who Vic really was?
Oh my God. Vic was kind. Vic had a dry sense of humor. Vic, he worked so hard at his craft. He practiced all the time, and I think one of the most profound things that happened to us through him getting cancer was how real it got. And so I remember one thing, I think I want the world to know this, that was really important. After he had an operation, and we were in the hospital, he was coming out of anesthesia, and he said, "Kate, I know the secret." I'm like, "What? What's the secret?" He said, "I know the secret." He kept saying that. I'm like, "All right, what is it?" He said, "Improvisation." I said, "What?" He said, "It's a gift from God." And I thought, not only was he worked really hard, because you have to work really hard and work at your craft, but he also had a spiritual side. And I think that's what I want people to know too. It was really deep. So that's where he could go when he was playing, when he would just let go and go free. I would always say, Vic, you're always able to go free, and I think he was able to do that in his life also. If anyone needed anything, he was there for them. We had students at our house when Vic got sick constantly who loved him, and he was so kind and good to. He would do things like, we played for free at a place called Hat City. He said, bring the kids down once a week. Let's get him to all sit in. Like, he wanted to make sure he gave back. And he was very sick. So I think that's it, and we talked, and I said, Vic, you are so loved, and people love you so much. I think you're exactly where you should be. I think you were meant to not only be an amazing guitar player, but also to pass down this information and to be a vehicle for that. And he has so many students who are now amazing guitar players that feel that way. And I think that's also his legacy.
So everyone has a perception of you as well, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you're the one that's living your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, God. I think I am, let's see, feisty. I think I'm a mixture of a lot of things, What I try to be as authentic as I possibly can. I think I try to be as kind as I can. And I think the most important thing I've learned through all this is to learn that love is the most important thing. So I try to live that way now more. Everybody has like multiple sides of themselves, at least I do anyway, so like the good part of myself, I try to stay on track with that and be as real as I possibly can. So I think when people meet me or know me, they know, because I teach a lot too, that I do have a kind heart, and I am feisty. So
I like
those
it.
2 things.
I sense that. So before we get off here, tell everybody where the best place is to pick up the brand new album and anything that you might be doing as far as shows and anything as the world starts opening up more.
Oh, yes. Okay, so where they can get the album is Bandcamp, Kate Baker and Vic Juris. That's where they can get that. And also I'm playing at Mesro, Jazz Forum, in October. I'm also playing at, the CD release is going to be at Birdland on November 30th. And, let's see, and where else am I playing? On my website, which is, we did a dual website, katebakerandvicjuris.com. They can get all the information for any of the shows and also links to the Bandcamp to buy the record. And
Wonderful.
we hope you like it.
Yeah. Oh, I have no doubt. Yeah. Hey, thank you. This has been wonderful. Thanks for opening up about your life and music, about this album and in between. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest vocalists and players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Kate for her time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.